Truck drivers, what's a creepy story you've got from the middle of nowhere? Part 3. Please like and subscribe to support this channel. Not a trucker, but I had a college teammate from Miami tell a story that he swears on to this day. He and his girlfriend were making the drive to Naples late night, on a 2-lane road through the Everglades, and had been in a line of cars behind an 18-wheeler for multiple miles. She fell asleep and he was surfing for something to listen to on the radio. Only one station came in clearly enough to be tolerable, so he gave it a listen. The DJ came on and said something along the lines of, "The stars are extra bright in the Everglades tonight. If you're driving through there, pull off and take a look." He said he normally wouldn't even think of it, but for some reason felt compelled to that night. He woke up his girlfriend. She was annoyed and didn't want to, but he convinced her it would be worth it. They stopped and just took in the stars for 5 to 10 minutes. He said it was the most amazing sky he's ever seen. They get back on the road and drive another few minutes and come across a massive accident. The truck they were following had jackknifed and took out a handful of vehicles that were following. He said there are multiple fatalities, but I've never been able to find a new story about it to confirm. Probably would have been in 2005-ish. They most likely would have been involved if not for that random DJ on the only radio station to come in that night. I'm not a truck driver, but the story is from a truck driver. I was working the overnight shift from Friday night into Saturday morning at a gas station. At about 6 a.m. a semi pulls into the fuel aisle. Driver gets out and almost runs into the store, clearly shaken. His face is completely white and he is obviously upset. My first thought was the poor man had hit someone on the road. We get a lot of drunks walking across a 4-lane highway in front of the store, so I ask what's wrong. He looks at me for a second and is like, "I'm not crazy." Now I'm thinking, great, I'm here all alone and this guy is losing it. I say, of course not. I just saw something huge on the side of the road. Like a deer or bear? We had a bear get in the dumpster last week. No bigger than a bear on its back legs. Maybe a big person. It picked up a dead buck on the side of the road and carried it over its shoulder into the woods. I can only stare at him. My brain cannot deal with this information this late in a shift. A local comes up to the counter to get his usual and the guy tells him the story. The local says, "That's the Bigfoot that lives near the county line." The truck driver and I are both looking at this guy like he has 2 heads. He has to be joking. This trucker pays for his fuel at record speed and leaves never to be seen again. The local still insists it's Bigfoot. I just don't got in the woods cause I don't know. As a crew guy of an off-road racing team in Baja California, Mexico, I got to test drive some rigs and trucks, so technically truck driver. We were driving down south along Sea of Cortez with a buddy at night at this 4-hour dirt road to Gonzaga, which is pretty much in the middle of fucking nowhere in the desert, and we see the lights of a car behind coming down fast and now effectively tailing us, and the bastard had bar mount headlights on top, or what seemed like it, which are super bright. It's normal, or was, that locals and gringos get wasted in the nearest, now former due COVID, spring breaker town and then go down this road super fast to test their rigs since there's no police there. So I try waving him off to get the guy to keep them lights low since he's blinding us, but he isn't slowing down a bit nor turn his roof lights off, and it was a dangerous super dark road. Finally, near a curve near the shore, I found a spot to bail off the road without crashing, and we see lights passing by us super fast and going straight to the curve, and we were like, that's it. He is going to crash down to the sea. But the lights didn't fall and kept going straight into the beach and the sea, and then pitched up abruptly to the night sky and disappeared. We didn't say a word for a minute or so, and then my buddy goes, "Did you see it?" And I say, "The fucking flying truck?" Didn't talk about anymore, as simply it didn't made sense to talk about it, or with anyone else when we arrived. FedEx contractor, I'm in one of those big box trucks. Anyways, I finished a long delivery day, and I swear to whatever fucking gods you believe in that I was hearing voices in my cab. It wasn't the radio, it wasn't my tinnitus, it wasn't my subconscious. I was hearing whispered voices in my right ear that were coming from the passenger seat. The voices continued even after I had gotten back to my hub, clocked out, and hopped in my own car to go home. They only stopped when I left the parking lot. It only happened that night. I still have no fucking idea what the hell it was because I had ruled everything else out. My father's told me this story maybe 1,000 times. My family, as well as a couple of uncles and my oldest cousin, went on a trip from Mexico City to Acapulco when I was barely a year old. Back home in the middle of the night, the good old days when you could travel at night, the car broke down, and a police car quickly came to our help. There were 3 policemen in the car, and the chief offered to take my dad to the nearest gas station, where he could find a mechanic, and told the other 2 officers to stay with our car. My dad says they seem absolutely not pleased with the order, until the chief told them, "Don't worry, there's a woman and 2 children," that seemed to calm the 2 officers. Driving to the gas station on the police car, my dad asked the chief what was all that about. The chief told him that there had been many accidents in that part of the road. That's why they were able to find our car so quickly. All of the accidents involved young men traveling without female or child company. Those who had survived said that they crashed because they could see a very beautiful woman next to the road. But once they came close to her, she turned out to be just a rotting corpse staring at them, and they crashed because they were paralyzed by fear. I worked at the Nevada nuclear test site, decommissioning old buildings. How much time do you have, lol? One of the creepiest days was when I was sent with an end dump load of non-hazmat material to the general landfill, which I had never been to before. Somehow I missed the turn and ended up at an armed gate with machine guns pointed at me. Very uncomfortable. Once I explained my mistake, I was quite hastily turned around. Still not knowing exactly where my turn was, a very nondescript desert road was what I was looking for. I headed back. I turned on the next dirt road I came to and ended up at the Sedan crater. Went and smoked a cigarette on the observation deck all by my lonesome. My hands were still shaking from the run-in with the armed guards. Another was when delivering a hazmat load to Area 25, they had begun using robots to guard the area. They were still in beta testing and someone may have just been fucking with me, but the damn thing perceived my truck as a threat and blocked my ability to move. I went inside the building and 15 minutes later it had moved on. I've got a few. Being stalked by, my gut says a skinwalker outside of Cedar City, but I've told that one elsewhere on Reddit. One of the worst was when I was parked at a dirt turnout in the Arizona desert between Cameron and Page for the night. This is out in Navajo country, I believe. About 2 a.m. I woke up to scratching at the window of my sleeper. Went on for about 15 minutes. I'm sitting there in the dark scared to death wondering what the fuck's happening with my Bowie knife in my hand. After it ended I waited another 15 minutes or so before I opened my curtain and looked out the windows, couldn't see anything outside and I was still the only one parked there. Got out the next morning and all I found were some footprints coming to the truck and eventually walking back into the desert. Haven't parked there since. I always stop at a small truck stop in Cameron now. Not me, but my mom told me a story about one late night out trucking. Her husband was sleeping in the back, and she was starting to get super tired and struggling to stay awake. She heard another trucker on the CB and started chatting with him. He helped her stay awake for the run until she stopped off at a truck stop until her husband could take over. And #X200B. That next morning, she told her husband what happened, and he told her the CB was broken, and that was impossible. Not me, but an ex-girlfriend's cousin's uncle. Yeah. I know it's a friend of a friend situation, but it was a well-known tale among the family. He was driving on a Mexican road at night. He felt a call of nature, so he parked on the sideway and jumped off the truck. He walked to relieve himself and while doing that he felt a presence beside him. He pointed his flashlight at his side and saw, standing beside him, a small deformed person. It was naked and had both its head and face bloated. And he was standing just there. The driver, ex-GF's cousin's uncle, ran away to his truck, jumped in, and drove away from there. There's been a lot since I talked with my ex. We're cool but not too much in touch. But if you want to know more I could ask her about the fuzzy details. Truck driving. Many years ago I did that. Long hours, and always tired because the dispatcher always thought you were behind. But there were some good stories. This one guy, when he saw another company truck at a rest stop and the driver was sleeping over the steering wheel, he would put on this gorilla mask he had and stand on the running board and knock on the window. Of course the driver invariably almost suffered a heart attack, and a couple even chased him around threatening great bodily harm. I was sitting in my truck one day waiting to load in a line of other trucks. One guy opens his door and stands on the running board like he is pissing off the side. Except he has this huge dildo in his hand. The next truck coming around the corner, the driver stared wide-eyed at this guy, who then proceeded to casually tap the huge penis against the hot exhaust pipe as if he is shaking off a couple of piss drops. The other driver almost hit the building. My uncle is a truck driver in Guatemala. Small town, with just a single road that passes through. I used to love sitting outside at night on the hammock, listening to his chilling stories. I'll start with the scariest ones. 1. Can you see them? My uncle said he hired a guy from town to help him drive late shifts at night with him on the road. Story was, the guy had somehow managed to burn a house down as a kid, and has since claimed to see the dead. Would occasionally swerve on the roads at nothing, or worse. My uncle said he would be sitting around, when the guy would say, "I see a little girl on the swing." My aunt confirmed it, said he would say things like that often. Apparently he learned to live with it or some scary third world shit. 2. The cave. My uncle said one night he was sleeping above the trailer bed, when suddenly, in the distance, he could see a small light approaching. As it got closer, he had a chilling realization. He described seeing a really old, wrinkly woman who held a candle, draped in dark gowns. He said her nails were so long they curled. She walked into a cave opening and disappeared. My uncle said he noped it out there real fast. 3. The horse. My uncle often likes to talk about spirits. He said one night while sleeping, a giant rabid horse tried to climb onto his truck. It would rock it back and forth, and the truck weighs an ungodly amount. He said when the rocking stopped, he jumped in and left. This is just the stories that I have from my uncle. I have also experienced paranormal stuff, and so has my family. Banging on the back windows with no one there, lights flashing at 3 a.m., and countless others. Guatemala is no joke lol. A few years back I was driving home after a shift. It was 3 or 4 a.m., and I was tired but not exhausted. It's a deserted state route in the middle of nowhere, and it's pretty common not to see a single car during the 30-mile trip. I drive this road multiple times a week. It's mostly open fields and some farmland through this 30-mile stretch. This particular night it was cold, but the sky was clear. Like no clouds or anything, and I actually love nights like this because you can see the stars so well without light pollution. Anyway, about halfway back home, I come over this hill to a 2 or 3 mile straight stretch. A huge, dark object about the length of a pickup truck, but far rounder and thicker catches my attention as it's just hovering about 50 feet in the air, 50 or 60 feet off the road over a farm field. There's a very bright red light coming out of the side or bottom. I couldn't tell exactly where it originated from because it was so bright. As I was going about 50 miles per hour past it, I only had a few seconds to look at it, but the image is burned into my mind. I have no idea what it was. I wanted to turn around, but I was kinda freaked out. I'm sure alien life exists somewhere, but as for visiting our planet, I dunno. But if I ever had to paint a picture of what I think a UFO could look like, I'd paint whatever the fuck I saw that night. Unfortunately, I haven't seen anything odd over that area since that night. Not exactly relevant, but still creepy AF. My dad is a trucker, and about 20-some years ago, a woman committed suicide by running out in front of him. He said that every night around the time she died, the cab of his truck would drop a few degrees in temperature and he felt a presence. He said this went on for a few weeks, and finally he spoke out to her and said he forgave her and wished that she had peace. He said he never experienced the eeriness again. Not a truck driver, but years ago I was driving with my ex-girlfriend back from a wedding in northern Wisconsin heading towards Madison where she lived. We were probably like 20 or 30 miles away from the city at that point, and it was probably around 1 a.m. My GPS, which was some really cheap brand that my dad got me as a gift from Radio Shack, had me going through some backcountry highways for some reason after I had stopped for gas instead of getting me back on the expressway right away. I didn't mind. I kind of always found those really peaceful, even though at night they are pretty creepy. My girlfriend was asleep in passenger seat, so I had turned down the music really quiet to not wake her, which added a bit to the eeriness of it all. I'm like really into this groove of driving, focused on the roads because it was so dark without streetlights everywhere. Then, something on the side of the road catches my eye. It was a giant mountain lion, with what appeared to be blood all over its face. I start shaking my girlfriend awake to get her to see it before it was gone, but she woke up too late. I pulled over to the side of the road and asked her to watch the rear view so she could see this huge thing cross the road, but it never did. She was convinced that I imagined it all because that area of Wisconsin is not known for mountain lions, but I swear I saw it. I'm not a truck driver, and this isn't involving a truck, but here's my story. I was driving on a cross-country road trip through the middle of nowhere, Kansas, when I had one of my tires blow out. I pulled over and went to call AAA, but I had no service on my phone. So I got out and started the process of trying to change the tire myself. After a very short while, a cop pulled up and asked if I needed help. I said yes thank you officer, and he said, "'Cause you're in luck. I just so happen to know the best tow truck driver. He could take you into town and you could get all fixed up no problem." The mosquitoes were eating me alive, and frankly, I only had a donut-style replacement tire and no clue how to properly change it. So I said, "Yes, please," and the officer gave the tow truck a call. After another short while, the tow truck arrived and the officer left. The driver asked, "Where am I towing you to?" So I was like, "I'm not sure, to town I guess." "Somewhere where I can get my tire fixed." He said, "Well you're in luck, 'cause I know the guy at the only place that's open right now who can fix that for you." I said, "Okay sounds good," and he towed us to the auto repair place. This was basically a ghost town if you could even call it a town. The tow truck driver and the repair guy sat around and bullshitted for a couple of hours while my tire was being fixed. Bear in mind there was nobody else there but me and my passengers. There was nobody else anywhere within sight. The town was empty except for the gas station connected to the repair place. Finally, they came out and said I was all set and gave me both my bills, one for the repair and one for the tow, $1,200 in total. For one tire and a 5-mile tow. For a 1991 Grandam that wasn't even worth that much. I was furious but had no options so I gave him my credit card and he was like, "Sorry guy. We're a cash-only kind of town hee." I was like, "Okay then. Well I don't have any cash on me so how we going to settle this up then?" And he was like, "Well, you're in luck. 'Cause there's an ATM next door at the gas station my buddy owns." So I went to the gas station and took out the maximum I could on 4 different cards, each with a $20 withdrawal fee. I looked behind the counter and in addition to the gas station attendant there stood the cop, the tow truck driver, and the repair guy all munching on Doritos and having a good laugh. I'm pretty sure I got hosed, and potentially maybe even sabotaged. Looking back, that cop sure arrived really quickly, and my other 3 tires were all still relatively new. I had to cut my trip short and invest in cortisone cream for the million mosquito bites. TLDR. Kansas ghost town folk drained me of $1,200 and I'm pretty sure they were highway pirates. Not a truck driver but was on the final leg of a 16-hour drive from Florida to northern Ohio with a caravan of about 8 cars and half of us drivers. Most of us up for 12+ hours at this point and everyone else in the cars sound asleep. Swear we saw a man walking his dog on the side of I-75 in the middle of nowhere between Cincinnati and Dayton at 3 a.m. To this day still don't know if that was real or we were hallucinating, but either way it was pretty creepy. I posted this in another thread. Not a truck driver but do a lot of driving for work and I just like driving. Driving from Spokane, Washington to Omaha, was cruising down Highway 212 in the middle of the night in southern Montana. About 2 a.m. I'm pulling through the only town, Lame Deer, MT maybe? I've tried to find it on a map since but can't be certain, on that lonely stretch of highway. One stoplight town, and I get stopped at the only red light. Hadn't seen a vehicle on the road since I had hopped off I-90 about an hour prior, and there wasn't a single person outside in the town. Sitting at that red light a loud siren alarm starts sounding. Loud enough that I don't see how any person in the town or within a few miles could have slept through it. It reminded me of the siren from the movie Silent Hill. I gunned it through the red light and away from that town as fast as my little 4-cylinder Malibu would go. It may not seem that crazy, but just imagine the most haunting sound you've ever heard, in a place you've never been, several hours separated from seeing a person last. I'm sure there's an innocent explanation for the siren, but it still sends chills down my spine just thinking of it. Not truck driving and not tired hallucinations. I had 3 friends helping me around midnight one night get a big toolbox into a storage unit before I could PCs to Texas. After, I offered to take them to Waffle House for food as payment since it was about the only place open at the time. We left the unit around 2 a.m. and made our way to the Waffle House, driving through the Chickamauga battlefield in Georgia to get to it. The place is terrifying to drive through on a regular night, but my friend and I thought we would have some fun with the other 2 who didn't grow up in the area. They didn't know any of the ghost stories of the park so we told them some while we were driving to kind of spook them a bit. Ghosts on the sides of the road. Green Eyes the mysterious ghostly panther creature. The hill your car will roll up when off. Rear view mirror ghosts, the works. We took a turn down a side road that leads to an old bridge that has the old stop and turn your engine off and it won't turn back on story. We get to the bridge, stop, and turn off the engine, sit for a minute, start it up, and kept driving with no problems. Nothing happened, just some harmless college kid fun. We drive over it and go around a corner, and standing in a ditch is a black mass just larger than a man. It doesn't move really, and even though the headlights panned across it directly, none of us can tell what it is. It's just black. All four of us screamed and I gassed it out of there, nearly sliding in a ditch to get away. All of us saw it and none of us could explain what it was and still have no idea 2 years later. Airline pilot here, that kind of counts. In the air, probably the creepiest thing I've heard was the distress call of a small general aviation aircraft going down. This was around 2014 in the PNW. He had just blown a cylinder head and oil was shooting out all over his windshield. You could hear the panic in his voice as he radioed out that he couldn't see, and was trying to report his position to a few airliners so that they could relay it to ATC. I checked the news that night and he actually died in the crash. It was a pretty eerie feeling that we heard the last words of a pilot fighting for his life while we were just cruising along above the clouds at 35,000 feet, completely powerless to do anything other than reach out to him over the radio. Had a pretty wild encounter with some scarred, toothless meth tweakers on a layover in Ciudad Juarez if anyone's interested in that. Edit. I've flown to some odd destinations, but one of the creepiest was Ciudad Juarez. Me and 2 flight attendants were bored on an El Paso layover, so we decided to get drinks at around 11 p.m. We drank until the bars closed at 2, and on the way out we asked the bartender if anything else was still open. Not unless you want to go to Ciudad Juarez, he joked. I looked at the flight attendants. We shrugged, nodded, and said, okay. He was shocked that we took him seriously. We walked the short distance back to the hotel, grabbed our passports, and set out for Mexico. Before we left, I asked the flight attendants, both women, if they were sure they were okay with this. Yeah, sure, as long as you're coming too. Liquid courage had officially overruled any fears of being kidnapped or beheaded, and off we went. So we walked 20 minutes south to the border. El Paso was completely dead quiet aside from a few homeless people, some of them stumbling around and clearly under the influence of drugs, but none of them bothered us. We reached the Mexican border and the guards took an extra second to look at the 3 crazy gringos before waving us through. It was close to 3 a.m. at this point, and we were 3 20-somethings wandering around the streets of Ciudad Juarez at night. I'm not sure how much you know about CJ, but it isn't exactly safe at night, especially for non-locals. The streets were pretty empty, and not a single bar was open, but everyone we passed stopped mid-conversation and stared at us as we walked by. The flight attendants were getting nervous, and were walking so close to me that we were brushing up against each other. After determining that everything within a realistic distance of the border was closed, we turned around to head back to the US. We'd probably been in Ciudad Juarez for around an hour, and somehow managed to navigate down the dark and deserted streets onto the same strip that we entered on. By this point, we were close enough to the border that there were a few streetlights that were still on. All of a sudden, 2 locals stumbled out from the dark sidewalks into the street, which we were walking down the middle of. As they came into the light, all 3 of us jumped at what we saw. A man and a woman, both with scarred faces, hunched backs, excessive sweat, ripped clothing, and missing teeth, were grinning as they approached us. The man was half speaking Spanish, half laughing. The startle factor of their approach combined with their appearance stands out as one of the biggest jump scares in my life. After realizing they weren't trying to kill us, yet, I figured screw it, we'd come this far, why not throw a Hail Mary? To my own disbelief, I actually tried to communicate with the man, and asked if he knew of any bars that were open. By this point, the flight attendants were so terrified that each one had latched themselves onto one of my arms. In any situation other than the one we were currently in, I'd have looked pretty cool. The man simply smiled, pointed behind him, and said, "Poor Allah, over there." There was a motel with all the lights turned off except for a steady red light on the front balcony, and a light flickering from inside a room on the 2nd floor. One of the flight attendants turned and said into my ear, "No fuck no. We need to leave now." I thanked the man and woman for their time, and we hightailed it to the US border. They gave us a thorough questioning, and rightfully so, as 1 man and 2 women crossing into the US at around 4 a.m. reeks of human trafficking. Weirdly, the number of people huddled on the streets of El Paso had doubled, and we speed-walked back to our hotel. That layover definitely takes the cake for creepiest thing to happen in the middle of nowhere. Quote, "Not a truck driver, but one night my friends and I were driving through a lightless valley around 1 a.m. Suddenly my headlights catch on an object in the middle of the road and, I shit you not, it's a man made out of tumbleweed. We don't even have tumbleweed where I live. It appeared very suddenly and I was so confused by its shape that I didn't brake or swerve. As we collided with it, my friend and I in the front seat both screamed. But nothing. No impact. We drove right through it, but it was just air. Both of my friends in the back seat were very confused why the two of us in the front screamed suddenly. So like, I know it wasn't just me. My friend saw it too. Creepy bugger who lived on a ranch in the middle of nowhere wanted to show me his dope-ass man cave basement and wouldn't stop hitting on me while I'm just trying to deliver some damn stone. Thank fuck I had my winch bar and pepper spray. I literally dropped shit as fast I could cause I already unstrapped and had my forklift down. Told the boss I'll never go back after. Only reason I didn't flat out run for it anyways was cause I was driving a 3-ton death machine and I didn't see a gun. My lil forklift is quick. I am a fucking tiny ass chick and the company sent out a gym bro ripped coworker next. That dude got the same treatment from the creepy guy and thought he was gonna get kidnapped too. In like 3 years doing this shit that's the only time I've been worried like that. They stopped sending people after David came back scared too, probably not the type of creepy op is looking for but whatevs. I was on a long haul, eastbound. Nothing but me, the miles, and the night. On runs like this I fall into a zone with the hum of the tires and vibration of the road coaxing me into a rhythm, not noticing details along the way. Illinois, Indiana, the long drag of Ohio, Pennsylvania. The miles rolled on. Slowly I realized something had changed. I was seeing lights. The farther I went the more there were. Suddenly I jerked to attention with the realization what was happening. Oh God, oh fuck. I was in Philadelphia. Not a truck driver but this still haunts me. Was driving from Chicago to Tampa to move with my dad. Somewhere in the middle of Georgia at 2 a.m. I'm mindlessly driving when my dad yells, "Yo, pay attention to the fucking red lights." Tons of cars ahead of us are stopped, smoke in the air. We slowly approach and first thing we see is a little car completely engulfed in flames. Then all of a sudden an 18-wheeler starts bouncing. Like how some people put hydraulics in their little pimp cars. Big boy was bouncing with flames coming out the back. I honked at the rubberneckers in front of me because I didn't want to see the explosion and there were already 12 cars pulled over. Too many cooks in the kitchen. The most surreal thing I had ever seen. Someone later told us it was the brake system? Looked like a demon-possessed truck. Not a truck driver, but I was field merchandiser so I'd drive all over to different grocery stores. One route was all Walmarts in West Virginia. In between Charlestown and Beckley I decided to do no toll since I had no cash coins on me. The views are amazing and I was just driving down these small roads mesmerized. I stopped off the road next to a creek to get out and take some pics. It was in the middle of the afternoon BTW. As I'm looking up the stream I see 3 tall, 15 feet, white crosses on the other side. This struck me as very strange and I instantly felt like I probably shouldn't be outside of my vehicle. It gave me a strong True Detective Season 1 vibe. As I'm processing this, 2 figures emerge from trees near the crosses. They were just a father and son and probably harmless, but I immediately noped right out of there and got in my car and pulled away. Well, nothing paranormal but something out of a strange biology book. I was driving a person in my care from the clinic out of state back home. It started to rain and I was on a very rural road due to a detour and frogs were coming out onto the road in droves. The whole road was jumping and moving. The car started to slide around on the frog carcasses. I had to drive about 20 miles per hour just to stay reliably on the road. I must have killed thousands of frogs that day. Making the long drive back to our university one midnight, my friend and I both saw a freakishly huge dog or wolf-looking creature on the side of the road. Eyes glowing and everything. It had been quiet in my truck before this, but we both saw it at the same time and yelled out. We don't live in an area with wolves, so I've often thought about it. Our bet has always been some alpha dog or coyote that has grown huge in the woods, or a bear that we both just mistook for a canine. Very much looked like a canine though. This will get lost, but if someone gets to read it then hey. Obligatory. This is my dad's story, who's been a trucker for over 50 years. He tells us of these experiences when we ask otherwise. He doesn't really speak of them. One night he was doing a long run. He knew he wouldn't make it home that night, so when he saw an old looking pub up ahead, Ireland, he decided to park up for the night about 1 8:30 a.m. and get himself a nice pint. He went into the bar and thought everyone was dressed really old-fashioned and dancing. He thought nothing of it and got himself a Guinness. He still says to this day it was the nicest pint he's ever had in his entire life. After he finished his pint, faces started to get fuzzy. He said it was like they were going out of focus. So he got back in the cab, pulled his curtains and done his crosswords until he fell asleep. The next morning when he woke up, he was going to get some breakfast and a coffee from the pub before he started driving again. He pulled his curtains and saw the pub from last night was derelict and boarded up, untouched for many years. He has no explanation for it, but he knows it wasn't a dream. My dad has many experiences like this one. If anyone wants to hear them, just let me know. Last week, I was in the middle of nowhere in northern Alabama, driving at night. Went over a small rise and see something on the side of the road between me and the next little hill. As I get closer, realize it's kind larger. So I edge myself slightly away from it in my lane in case it's a tree or something. Turns out to be a homeless dude on the side of the road wearing some kind of tan trenchcoat and a really gaunt look in his eyes. Like, he wanted me to hit him. It was creepy. One time I was driving a big truck full of mailers to NYC from Atlanta in February. In the middle of the night, like 2 a.m., we are in the middle of nowhere, we are cruising and my girlfriend, passenger, suddenly sits up straight with a "pull over now." So I'm like, what? She's like, "Now, pull over right now," so I do. We sit there for a few minutes and I'm all, WTF? And she's like, "I dunno. Okay, whatever, let's just keep going." It was a feeling and intuition. So we pull back on the highway, crest the next hill, and before us is a huge accident with wheels still spinning on turned over cars, smoke fire. It just happened, no cops yet. We would have been in that many car wreck for certain if we hadn't pulled off. Lesson: always trust your girl's intuition. Not a truck driver, but I drive far for work sometimes. I once got a flat tire at 2 a.m. on a really remote back road up a mountain about an hour drive away from any houses or anything. Without any reception or a jack to change the tire. Had to wait a half hour or so for a truck to go by, and I flagged them down with the light on my phone. Asked if he had a jack I could use to change my tire, and he said, "I got a jack, but you ain't getting it," and he drove away before I could even say anything. Sometime later someone stopped and helped. I genuinely thought I would die that day. Only thing that's ever happened to me was during the last week at a major carrier before I began driving local. I was on edge because we had a strict, no passenger policy due to insurance, and here's this female friend of mine who wants to become a truck driver. So I break the rules and take her out for 5 days to change her mind about driving. I left my home, headed towards my typical rest area right as I'm entering Illinois. I've driven this route many times, so I know where I need to stop for the night. My truck was governed at 62 miles per hour. I am almost done with my 11 hours of drive time, coming upon my rest stop in a few miles. Look at my Qualcomm and it says I have an extra hour and a half to drive. There is no way possible. I'm driving west to east. It was not daylight savings time. Late August, so I decide to get closer to my destination and I continue driving while we continue talking. An hour later I notice that I still have an hour left of drive time. I am tired as hell. My friend is in the passenger seat trying to do the math for me. Time we left, brakes, etc. I finally said screw it and pulled into the next truck stop and called it a night. But I had been driving for 13 hours and yet my timeline shown that I had only driven for 11 hours. By Thursday, 2 passenger vehicles had spun out right in front of me, wrecking into everything but my truck, and 1 semi-truck stalled out in front of me going up a mountain pass. Great times one crazy week. My friend decided to go into medical instead. TL. Dr. The black dog, you see it once, take the warning and pull over. Don't get greedy, it'll take everything you have. And #X200B. Not a truck driver, but my dad has told me this story. He's not a trucker either, but he's done a lot of driving. Fortunately he hasn't seen this creature either. There's this thing called the black dog. It shows up when people get greedy. When truckers or drivers in general have been driving for so long, haven't seen their family, etc. This thing shows up to take everything you've got. It shows up in the middle of the road, often on isolated and dark roads, typically when the person is close to falling asleep and they see it, swerve to avoid hitting it, since they think it's a dog or some sort of animal, and often end up in a fatal one-vehicle accident. To anyone here who does driving a lot, don't push your hours, the money isn't worth it. You see this dog, or whatever form it may take, you pull over immediately and rest. You get one warning, sometimes not even that. If you ignore the first one, it'll get you the second time. I'm a delivery driver for a florist. About 2 or 3 months ago, I had to deliver an arrangement about 2 hours drive into the country from the city near the end of my shift. When I arrive at the address, I don't see any house but these old farming sheds and a really long dirt road. I get out of the truck, grab the arrangement and walk down this dirt road. Sun is pretty much about to disappear, and I've walked about 10 minutes and am questioning whether or not I should have braved driving the truck down. I finally see this old shack with a light on, so I walk up to it. I'm about to go to the front door when I hear from around the side of the house, "Just leave it." I answer, "Does live here? Just leave it by the door, it will eventually get to them." I do so, and walk as quick as I could back to the truck, lock it and drive away a bit quicker than normal. My dad was a long-haul trucker years back. He would drive from Ontario all over the US. The one creepy encounter I remember him mentioning was as he was passing through Florida, of course. He was driving through the Everglades late into the night, out in the middle of nowhere. No civilization for miles either way, when he notices a white figure come into the headlights or on the shoulder of the road. He slows down and there is a man completely naked coming out of the swamp. My father slows and stops in the road, thinking this guy may need help, as this man starts crossing over the road. He stops dead in front of the truck and stares at my dad. At which point my dad realizes this naked man is holding a shotgun. He stands there for a few seconds staring, holding this gun and then continues across and disappears back into the wilderness whence he came. So many questions. Not a truck driver, but still a traveling in the middle of nowhere story. Many years ago, we were driving back to Southern California from a cabin stay in Northern California. This was a huge car accident on the freeway that was adding 4 hours to our drive. This was when TomToms were at their peak and started to come standard with traffic avoiding redirections. Anyways, the TomTom chimes up as the sun's going down and says it can save us 3 hours if we get off the freeway. Then it proceeds to lead us through the moonless night on rural roads surrounded by cornfields. I turn to my wife and say, "I've seen this movie before, keep your eyes open." A few minutes later, there's a van on the side of the road with its hazard lights on, and normally I would stop and help, but no way, not tonight, Satan. And for the next hour of driving having no idea what was around us or where we were, it was one thing after another. Broken down cars with hazards on, having semis on either side of us making us hold our breath that they don't force us to stop. Too many of every horror film trope for a simple 1-hour detour. Not a truck driver. However, I do have a somewhat creepy story. My friends and I were taking a road trip from Arizona to California. We decided we wanted to go before the sunrise and we left about midnight. We were about 3 hours in but my car needed gas and the girls and I wanted to stop to toke up. We had a considerable amount of weed in the car and we wanted to get rid of all of it before our drive back. So we start to roll a joint in this poorly lit gas station. We were just about to take a hit when this guy comes running up to my car and starts to pound on the driver's side window. I rolled it down just enough to talk to him but not enough for him to force entry into my car. He seemed scared and shaken up but something didn't seem right. He was sweaty and I could tell he was looking inside my car for something. At first I thought he was an undercover cop and my heart was racing. However, he said he had some car trouble and asked if we would take a look at it. At this point, it was 3 a.m. I had all my doors locked and had not gotten gas yet. I knew nothing of cars and neither did any of the ladies in the car. We told him this. I told him I could call a tow for him. Although, he persisted on using my phone. The other girls were freaking out and of course, I was too. I could see a payphone by the vending machine at the gas station and told him I would slip him a few quarters through the crack in my window so he could call whoever he would like. Out of nowhere, his tone changed. He got really calm and looked me dead in the eye. He told me to unlock the door. My eyes darted towards the direction of his car and we could see 2 other males pacing while one male was sitting in the driver's seat. I noped the fuck right out of there. Told him to go fuck himself. Rolled up the window and hopped right back on the highway. I know for a fact, if we had gotten out of that car, we would have never been seen again. I called the police to report him and asked to be notified if there was an arrest made. I never heard back. Arizona is #1 for sex trafficking. Be safe out there, ladies and gentlemen. I'm not necessarily a trucker, but I am a commercial delivery driver in a rural area in Midwest US. Randomly one day as I am leaving our home store, the radio just stopped working in the store. We thought nothing of it and I left to start the day and they just turned off the radio in the store and continued their day. I start the car and boom, radio not working. But it wasn't working on every single station. So I thought that was weird and decided to go back in the store and ask them to see if it was that way on their radio. Same thing. I go out to my personal car, no radio. I call my fiancé and best friend who are on the complete opposite side of the county where it's not rural, no radio. Call my mom, nothing on her end. Everyone I worked with called surrounding stores and customers and they had nothing. It was this weird blackout. So I finally ended up leaving for the day's deliveries. I left the radio on in the background even though it was static just for some sort of noise. The volume was really low, but out of nowhere a faint talking can be heard and it was going in and out. It was a language I did not recognize at all, and I honestly don't even know what to compare it to, and it sounded like a female computerized voice. Oddly though, my store's radio caught it as well, as they later told me they heard it too. After that, it was static again for a few hours. Then slowly one by one, stations came back up. Now, this is so easy to probably have an explanation to, but the weirdest thing about it was that there was no media attention to it, and no radio station mentioned anything about the hours-long blackout. It was like it never happened. What freaks me out about this was the complete silence about it and how no one was given an explanation. Okay, here goes. While in high school I used to hang out every Friday night a couple towns away with two friends. This was upstate NY in the mid-90s. The drive home was about 45 minutes up and through the mountains. There was one patch of road that had no houses or streetlights for about 5 to 10 minutes straight and always freaked me out a little seeing how dark it was. One night while I was driving this patch of road my very worst fear occurred. The headlights from my car started to dim. Then I noticed not only the rest of the lights in the car dashboard starting to dim, but the entire car seemed to be running out of energy altogether. Before I knew it the car started stalling and I had to pull over. I remember yelling no, no, please, no, fuck. I was freaking the fuck out because this is how every alien abduction tale begins. When I finally stopped it was pitch black. There was no light whatsoever except from the glare of the moon. I may not have been more scared in all my life. I gave it less than a minute and I just kept trying to turn the car back on by twisting the key. It worked like a charm and the car fully came back on and I was able to get the hell out of there. Never found out why it happened to begin with. Story 2. Yet another Friday along the same patch of lightless road. This time as I was driving I looked up into the sky to my right and saw something large, but very far away, falling out of the sky completely engulfed in fire. I've never seen anything like it and especially the trail of fire. It was a literal fireball. I watched as it passed the mountains and disappeared. It being after midnight and desolate out I imagined I must have just seen a UFO crash. The next day I learned that pieces of the Russian space station were said to be falling to Earth after it lost orbit and it was abandoned. I don't remember the town, other than it was near Oklahoma-Kansas border, but we pulled into this town, and the place was deserted. Most of the buildings and homes looked like they were less than 20 years old, including schools. It's still one of the creepiest things I had ever seen. Later learned the town was host to a lead mine that structurally undermined the town. The truck was under the posted weight limit, and the water supply was contaminated, which is the reason it was deserted, but still creepy. Not a truck driver, but I worked for a catering company once and they had me drive the truck one morning at like 4:30 to deliver a shit ton of breakfast to some tech-in facility with engineers who do military contract stuff. Not a huge truck, but still a truck I had no business driving. The assholes didn't fill in the tank so I had to pull over to get gas. I was the only person at the gas station and this older white Cadillac with tinted windows pulled up. This older gentleman in a nice suite jumped out and came running at me and started screaming in a thick possible Trinidadian or Guyanese accent, "Excuse me sir, excuse me. I have a quick question to ask." I said sure, what's up? He replied, "Do you know where the dead people are?" And got all bug-eyed. AMD said, "No, I don't know any dead people." He replied, "Heaven, hell, reincarnated? If you are unsure you need to learn about Jehovah and his glory brother." He then handed me a religious pamphlet that said, "What to do when a loved one die." That shows a photo of a hysterical crying woman holding her hysterical crying son. He then said, "Read this to learn about death." then walked back to his car. I sat there and thought, damn, that's a nice car and nice suit. Threw the pamphlet away and got a Swisher Sweet at the store, then left to go to deliver the food to the catering place. Not a truck driver myself, but I like to accompany my stepfather from time to time. This one time, we were on this curvy road of just trees, not a house, not even fences on the land behind the trees. As the hours pass, I start seeing a man, white rubber boots which were dirty, a vertically striped light blue button shirt, a blue cap, a cloth bag hanged from his right shoulder, and a long-ass machete hanging from his dusty jeans. I don't know why I remember him so clearly. For some reason, as we got closer and closer, he was just the same distance. I said, "Hey, we should offer him a ride, it's an empty road far from any town." My stepdad looks over and says, "Who? There's no one other than you and me." I said, "There is, look over there in front, the man with the light blue shirt." This kept on for a few minutes back and forth, until the man just disappeared. I said to myself, "Oh good, probably just my imagination." Until blood spots start appearing on the road. I decided not to tell my stepdad because I thought it probably was just an animal which got hurt, or my imagination playing with my boredom, but it never ended, and what made it worse is that when I asked to stop for a second to take a piss, the man appeared again. Only difference was it was on the opposite direction. I said to myself, "Oh fuck sake, not you again." I decided to not pay any attention to it and just carry on with my business. When I finished, the man was running towards me, and kept getting closer and closer. I got scared and jumped hastily back inside the truck, and told him to start moving because the man was coming. He laughed and told me I was crazy, and that there's nobody. The blood stopped a few kilometers away, and it never came to my mind after that, until my mom told me about seeing the same man, and the same blood trail, on a similar road. It might not be as scary as some others in the post, but it really messes with your brain. A friend of mine's husband is an OTR driver. He told me a story last year. In California, he decided to stop for the night in this diner parking lot. Wasn't much else around, but he thought a hot coffee would feel wonderful. So he hops off the truck, walks in. He's greeted by a beautiful lady named Jackie. She welcomes him, sits him down, and asks if he'd like some pancakes and coffee. He tells her he isn't hungry. She frowns and brings back some coffee and homemade pie. Tells him he needs to eat it. It's the most delicious thing he's ever tasted. Jackie sits down with him and talks for an hour. He realizes she's a special lady. An Elvis song comes on and he asks her to dance. After a couple of slow dances, she hands him a rose. He thanks her and she asks him to come back in before he leaves for a hot breakfast. He nods and heads out to his sleeper. Wakes up to pounding on the window. Sheriff is outside and asks him if he's doing all right. He says yes sir. They get to talking a little and he tells the sheriff that he's leaving soon after he goes in to say his goodbyes to Jackie. Explains a little about how he really liked her. The sheriff stares at him bewildered and says, "Jackie died 3 years ago." He motions to the diner that is run down and completely abandoned. Driver opens his truck and pulls out the rose he had left on the passenger seat. Sheriff takes a step back and tells him Jackie was known for putting fresh-cut roses on the tables. Apparently 3 men broke into the diner late one night and murdered Jackie during a robbery. Driver had no idea about any of this. Not a truck driver. But this was my creepy experience doing work as a medical courier. Cody, Wyoming, midnight. I had just finished a very long day at work. I am a medical courier, and I am regularly on the road, staying in hotels, and life is never dull. This particular evening I wound up on a 500 miles drive that ended in Cody, Wyoming, at around midnight. It had been cold, it was December after all, and this is Wyoming. The roads had been very so-so that night. They weren't clear, but they weren't treacherous. It was one of those drives in the dark where you are on edge the whole time. Staying alert for 500 miles in the dark, on roads that were nearly abandoned at this time of night, with light snow and heavy winds, it takes a lot out of a person. This particular week it had been very busy. I had been in 4 states that week by the time I reached Wyoming that evening. The drive to the patient's house was up a windy, slick road, and the drive was uneventful. After I had dropped the medicine off to them and called the boss to let them know I had made it in and was heading to a hotel to get some sleep. Pretty usual conversation. We talked briefly about how much they would reimburse me for the hotel room. They always say $80 to $100. It's pretty typical and fair, since the cheap hotel in Cody, Wyoming is about that price. I however am 31 and a good night's rest, a good free breakfast, and a nice AM soak in a hot tub are requirements for when I catch myself in a hotel room. I know that by the time I get to the hotel I have put on serious miles, so I treat myself. 1. Because if I am staying in a hotel it has been a profitable day and I can afford to treat myself just a little, and 2. I feel better after a good night's rest, a great breakfast, and a nice soak. I will not name the chain of hotels I stay at, but I frequent one chain because it's the best value hotel in my hometown, which is back in Nebraska. Tonight I pulled into the hotel, which I have stayed at 3 or 4 times now, so I am familiar with the place. I had called ahead about 8 hours before when I was leaving Denver to call and book a room, and let them know they would be expecting me at midnight. I walk into the hotel with my bag, dusting off the snow that had fallen on me while I got my stuff out of the car and walked inside. It's very quiet, there's no music and the TV isn't on in the lobby. I wander to the counter, leaving a trail of wet shoe prints behind from coming in out of the snow into the lobby, my shoes squeaking as I approach the counter. When I get to the counter there is no one at there. On the counter is a bowl of ice cream, with a brownie from the restaurant connected to the hotel. The local paper is open to the comics page, and the Sudoku is half filled out with a pen sitting there. Hanging on the back of the chair is a small lady's coat with fake fur fringe around the hood. On the floor next to the chair are a pair on smaller pink and black Nikes, and a black purse. I figure that she, by the assumption of the coat, shoes and purse, is in the bathroom, so I stand at the counter quietly, waiting on her to return. I fiddle with my wallet getting out my card to pay for it and my ID. I scroll through on my phone and hook to the free Wi-Fi. 5 minuets go by. Then 10. At 15 minuets the phone starts ringing. I still had no idea where she was, and I had begun to get irritated. It had been a long day and I wanted to get rested before I got up and drove home in the morning. After the phone stopped ringing, and I started to get frustrated, I began to wander around the lobby, and behind the counter shouting, "Hello, is anyone here?" as loudly as possible. The area behind the counter is an employee-only area. I venture back behind the counter where a hallway leads to the back of house area connected to the offices, staff elevator, bathrooms, laundry and the restaurant. I venture down the hallway shouting hello, still no one answers. It is now 12:30 am. As I return to the counter and begin looking for a posted phone number for a manager, or someone of authority, the phone rings, the cordless phone still laying next to the paper she had opened. Frustrated and exhausted I answer the phone, hoping it's someone who could tell me where the woman is who is supposed to check me in. It's not. It's another guest, who had tried calling earlier for a wake-up call in the morning. I explain to the gentleman on the phone my situation, and how I cannot help him. He states he is coming to the lobby to help me look for the girl at the counter. I had not found a number to call. 5 minuets go by and the strange older man, with odd glasses and long unkempt hair comes into the lobby from the first-floor hallway. At this point I had been behind the counter, and had been shouting to the point I feared I may wake up other guests. I had wandered through the back area, the lobby and the front part of the restaurant, all while shouting, and no one responded. This guy had given me the creeps, and I was exhausted but on high alert. There was an employee missing, and a creepy guy who just happened to appear in the same time she is missing. Feeling nervous about this gentleman I stay prepared for any strange behavior and keep myself at least arm's distance from him the entire time. I explain where I have looked. That I have yelled. At this point I begin to go through what I call worst case scenario preparation. This guy could have easily overpowered a small woman. I may be standing here with a crazy person. I keep my space and my back towards the main entry just in case. I am a grown man, just under 6 feet. I have had self-defense courses, and I have a CCW, concealed carry weapon, after encountering a bear at a patient's house in the fall. I have no reason to believe I am in immediate trouble, but this guy just gives me the creeps. It is at this point I debate calling the cops. It's now 12:45 am. The gentleman tells me, maybe she's in the bathroom, which I respond to that I had thought that myself, but I had walked by and yelled loudly when I walked through the back and no one responded. He insists we check the bathrooms. My red flag goes off and I put another foot or two of space between us as I let him lead us down the hallway to the employee bathroom. My heart and mind are racing at this point. Did this dude kill her and now he's gonna try to kill me? I start to worry about my safety as we go down a hallway that leads to small rooms and with one exit in and out. We reach the bathroom. He knocks and announces himself, then opens the door. The bathroom is empty. We check a few more rooms in the elevator and find nothing. We venture back to the lobby where I stand behind the counter looking for any phone number that could be a manager or supervisor. After about 10 minutes I find a number and someone answers. It's now 12:55 am. The half-asleep voice on the other end of the phone is the maintenance woman for the hotel. Confused as to who I am and why I am calling, I explain the situation as the creepy man stands on the other side of the counter staring at me in a dead cold manner. The maintenance woman says she will be there in 10 minutes or so. I hang up the phone. I walk around the counter still confused looking at her stuff there, as if she just vanished. It's at this point I decide to wander towards the lobby, seating for the restaurant. Once in the doorway I turn the corner and down at the end of the booth there are a pair of legs hanging out of the booth. I had walked within 15 feet of there while checking around before the creepy guy showed up. I see her legs hanging and instantly the pit of my stomach turns sour and a sense of dread comes over me. Suddenly the creepy guy walks right up by me. Thinking the worst, I take a few quick steps away from him and down the row of booths in the dark restaurant. With him at the other end, I look in the booth where she is laying. She is maybe 20 and very pretty. I shake her foot, she doesn't respond. I shake again, saying, "Hey." Nothing. It's at this moment the creepy guy starts down the booth that I finally feel I may need to defend myself. I kneel down to draw from my ankle holster as he quickly comes down the row of booths, and it's at this exact moment the girl wakes up and accidentally kicks me in the chest, knocking me gently on my ass and stopping Mr. Creepy in his tracks, also stopping me from drawing a weapon. She had been asleep. Mr. Creepy was just a guest. Moments later the maintenance woman arrived and by 1:15 am I was in my room trying to decompress. TL. Drive? Hotel clerk wanders off late at night. She is found alive and safe, but not after I prepare myself to find her dead and almost draw a weapon on a creepy guy. I was on an on-ramp on 55 in Mississippi taking a 30 and resting my eyes at about 0230 or so. My eyes lit up like a light was shining in them and I didn't pay much attention until I realized that someone would have to be pointed in the wrong direction to bright light me. I opened my eyes and nothing was in front of me, but the woods to my right were lit up in a near blinding white light. I couldn't see a source because the trees weren't casting shadows. I don't know if the truck was actually shaking or I was just scared. I punched the brakes and jammed it into gear and left. I was 20 minutes late because I had to stop and take another break, but I told dispatch a trooper told me I had to move off the ramp or something like that. It's really the only thing I've seen that's unexplainable except for a random guy on US 79 in Tennessee pulling a wheeled suitcase down the shoulder at the same time for 4 nights in a row. Okay. So I was at one point a truck driver, but this didn't happen to me or to someone driving a truck, but it did happen at night on the road. So my friend was in a car with his 3 friends, driving out on Long Island somewhere. They had been out at a bar or something until it closed and were heading home. The driver notices they are being followed by another car. Everyone is like, "Nah, you're crazy." He pulls off at the next exit. The car follows. He proceeds right back onto the highway, parkway, expressway, whatever, and the other car still follows. Okay, now everyone is losing their shit. It's not a cop car. And it looks like there are 4 guys in that car, too. For whatever reason, my friends have one of those 30,000 candle power flashlights, so they decide to light these guys up. They aim out the back window and switch it on. In the car behind them are 4 dudes with Jason Voorhees hockey masks on. My friends scream. The now blinded hockey mask dudes scream and pull over. My friends got away. Not a driver, yet, thinking about it as a career change, used to manage in a large retail store. One morning we had an early morning meeting. A neighboring parking lot had an auto transport with the cab engulfed in flames. Drivers don't normally sleep there, but will park and go to their homes nearby. I park and decide to be noisy and watch from the distance. Firefighters weren't there yet, and after about 10 seconds with no sirens I call 911. No one had called yet. Operator asked if driver was inside and I said, "I don't think so, but if they are, they're dead from smoke or fire." Right then the driver in only his tidy whities comes around the back clearly distraught. It was winter, so I rushed him inside so he could warm up and watch from the windows. I asked his sizes and had an overnight stalker grab him clothes and shoes. His stuff was clearly toast. Not a trucker. Many years ago I was driving south on a freeway in the middle of Utah. I haven't seen another car coming or going for miles, even though it's the middle of the day. Then I see a semi ahead in the right lane of this 2-lane southbound freeway. I'm gaining on him in my lovely red sports car, so I pull into the left lane to pass. I was slightly over the speed limit to pass him quickly, he was doing slightly under the limit. There is no shoulder because it's some kind of bridge or culvert crossing. Remember, no other cars anywhere around. Just as I reach the hallway point on the semi, he starts changing lanes for no reason. Into my lane. I have nowhere to go because there is no shoulder and I am going to die. Time slowed. The world blurred. Somehow I floored it in time and my wonderful car flung me forward and ahead of death. He was fully in my lane when I looked in the rear-view mirror. I have no doubt that he tried to kill me. It was clear, sunny, and he had nothing in front of him that would cause him to change lanes. There were no curves to hide my very red car as I overtook him. He could easily see me coming on the long straightaway. There was absolutely no reason for him to change lanes right as I was passing him. This part of the freeway was always isolated back in the day. There were no cars near us, no animals, and I saw no car for the next few miles as I raced away from him. If he tapped my car or if I overreacted, it probably would have looked like an unfortunate accident. I used to team drive with my buddy OTR and he was night blind, so I got the night shift. It was about 3 a.m. and we were driving through Central OR and I had 2 trailer tires blow. So I pulled off the side of the road right near an exit for Dead Monts Pass. I woke my buddy up, we inspected the blowout and started getting a hold of somewhere to come fix the tire. While waiting for a call back, we both noticed an eerie light coming from the edge of the woods off the highway about 40 yards away in front of our truck. Mind you, it is an extremely remote area in which we had not seen a town or light in probably 2 or 3 hours, and hadn't even seen another vehicle for an hour or so. We had some time to kill, so we started to walk up and see what was causing the light. We got about 10 yards away from the source to discover that it was a goat hanging upside, suspended from 2 trees with Christmas lights wrapped around it and lit up. We did not know if it was a real goat or fake, how the Christmas lights were powered up. We immediately ran back to the truck and drove the blown tires 70 miles to the nearest truck stop, and we're not gonna stick around and find out the answer to those questions flushed. I'll chime in. I have 2 stories. Not a truck driver but a rural sheriff's deputy in the middle of the Appalachian Mountains. We had 2 of us who patrolled almost 500 miles of road, and it wasn't uncommon for weird shit to happen. These are the ones that I still can't explain. On patrol one night around 2 a.m. going down a pitch black, no moon, country road, I'm traveling about 60-ish miles an hour and I come to a set of small rolling hills. I go down the first hill, back up, back down, and as I get to the bottom there is a person right in front of my car. It looked like an old woman in a white gown. I know it sounds like every scary movie, but this is what happened, and I knew I was going to hit her. I locked up the brakes and she was dead center of my cruiser about 10 to 15 feet out. I braced for impact, and I guess I locked up the brakes so hard that old Crown Vic the car fishtailed at the last minute. She passed right beside my door and window. I could have reached out and grabbed her. Of course it all happened so fast it was a blur, no features on the person. I stopped. Thank God I didn't kill some poor old woman who wandered out of her house, and you guessed it, she was gone. And to top it off, this was right next to an old church and cemetery. I looked and yelled and never saw the woman again. Eventually I got creeped out and just left. I have no idea what the hell happened. There are no houses within miles of this church and cemetery. Second story, a few years later or before, I can't remember at this point, it was decades ago. Same part of the county, not that far away actually, just a few miles down that same exact road. Similar time of night, on patrol, and I am coming up to a giant straight stretch of the road that contained a 4-way intersection. I see headlights approaching me and I slow down, come to a stop at the intersection. I realize after a few seconds the headlights are just sitting in the roadway about 100 to 150 yards away. Strange, but not the weirdest thing, it could be a drunk. I start driving up to see what's happening and the headlights go out. So I stop for a second and wonder WTF is happening. The lights come back on. I sit there for a second and both lights elevate about 10 to 12 feet off the ground and then come together to form a single, bright light. At this point I'm starting to feel my skin crawl. The light immediately goes out. I turn all of my lights on and go down the road and try to figure out what it is I just saw. I came across nothing. No cars, farming equipment, nothing. There's no way whatever was in that road could have gotten around me or turned around and left without me seeing them. To this day I have no clue what those lights were. Back when my dad as a freight train driver, he had to stop at a red light in a wooded area in the middle of nowhere. The guard of the train, who's usually at the back of the train, radioed to tell him that it's gonna take a while, so Dad got off his cabin to take a leak. As he was watering the bushes, he saw a relatively well-dressed man approaching him, and he asked my dad to give him a lift to the nearest station. This man had a backpack and, for some reason, an axe. Dad decided to give him a lift and asked him to take a seat in the cabin. All throughout the 2-hour journey to the next station, the man didn't put down his backpack or his axe. He was eyeing him constantly through the corner of the eye and read a manic expression that you absolutely don't get from a lumberjack who had gotten off work 2 a.m. After dropping off the man, the guard and my dad notified the cops and gave them the man's description. A month or so later, the department was issued a notice to not give lifts to strangers, as the man they had picked up was a gang member and had just shot a man and buried him in pieces in that general vicinity.